In the previous video, the Grim Reaper forgot that he had erased Sunny's memory, where she had told him her real name. This led to an awkward situation when he called her by her secret identity, and when they went to talk outside the establishment, the Grim Reaper ended up seeing the woman's past, something he had been avoiding. Now that we've seen the memories of Sunny's past life, two questions linger. Could she be the Goblin's sister who was married to the king? And the Grim Reaper, could he be that king? Well, we'll have to keep watching to find out. In the next scene, we see that the following day, Woo-bin met with Sunny to retrieve the ring, and as part of his investigation, he asked her why she chose that ring among other jewels. Sunny replied that she felt as if it belonged to him and that somehow, picking the ring allowed the Grim Reaper to cross her path. Now we move to the moment when Woo-bin is at home cooking with the goblin. In the middle of their conversation, Kim Shin starts talking about his sister, mentioning that hearing Sunny's real name brought back some memories. The goblin just wanted to know if Kim's son had already reincarnated and if she was okay. Since the Grim Reaper has some suspicions about the woman being among them, the man quickly changes the subject and encourages the goblin to talk about his past life. Meanwhile, the protagonist had already arrived home and was quietly listening outside. Starting with the young king, the goblin tells us that when the boy was born, his father had already passed away, his mother was from a humble family, and she soon fell ill. He had a brother old enough to be his father, who was the king at the time, so this child was often alone, and the only one by his side was his teacher named Jung-hyun. However, after the man became the child's master, strange things began to happen around him. For example, the heir to the throne suddenly died, followed by the princes who found this very suspicious. Later, the current king, the child's brother, also passed away. Initially, everyone said it was just a hereditary disease, but eventually, the young boy would discover that, in fact, they were all poisoned. Before the current king passed away, he met with General Shin and made a request to his best soldier, to marry Yeo, the future king and the boy we just talked about, to his sister, so that both would be protected by the general. We all know that coronations only happen after the king is declared dead, but Jung-hyun didn't even wait for that to announce the new king. In Jung-hyun's mind, since he could never sit on the throne due to his social status, he planned to raise the king in a way that would allow him to rule from behind the scenes. However, something bothered him, the late king's last decree that Wang Yeo should marry Kim Shin's sister. Meanwhile, the two young people were slowly starting to like each other more, and of course, their beauty gave a little push in that direction. But at the same time, Jung-hyun was doing things to harm the general, manipulating the king, and when the queen discovered this, she ordered the man to step down from his position, but she realized she had no power over it. In the next scene, we see when the king sent the general to his last battle, the Majesty wanted Kim Shin to lose his life honorably on the battlefield because if he returned, he would lose it in the castle courtyard. With everything he planned being executed, Jung-hyun was happy when he could finally get rid of the general and the thorn in his side, Kim Sundae. But later, as we know, our goblin awoke. And although he carried the pain of losing everyone he loved, he ignored his Majesty's jealousy and fear because Kim's son protected him until the end, and thus, he honored the decree that the late king had passed on to him. Back in the present, the protagonist interrupted the two's conversation because she wanted the goblin to accompany her to the grave of that ghost who was her friend and to whom she had promised to bring flowers. When the two arrive at the site, Untak notices a photo of her mother with the ghost girl, so she quickly asks the goblin to take her to the library, and when she finds her ghost friend, she discovers something that left me speechless. The ghost was the best friend of the protagonist's mother, and when they were in high school, they made a promise that when they had children, they would give each other's children nice clothes, and since the ghost couldn't fulfill her part due to the accident and what followed, she did something more. You know that money that the girl's aunt was searching for from the life insurance? It was with the ghost all this time, saved for Untak. Now that her unresolved issue in this world had been settled, the ghost bid farewell to the protagonist to move on and send news of the girl to her mother. In the next scene, we see that the goblin continues to take care of our little protagonist because as soon as they returned home, he contacted Diakwa's grandfather's secretary and asked the man to handle Untak's insurance since she is not yet old enough to withdraw it without the signature of her legal guardian, who would be her aunt. It would be difficult to access that money, and somehow, the man promises he will find a way. Later, the Grim Reaper gets ready to meet Sunny, and when he passes by the goblin, based on the clothes the man is wearing, Kim Shin knows that today will be the day the woman breaks up with him, so the goblin even tries to prevent the future from happening by telling Woo Bin to change clothes, but that's not quite how things work. As soon as the Grim Reaper arrives, we see their breakup. It turns out Sunny wanted to know more about the person she was interested in, and since Woo Bin doesn't answer her questions, she vents, saying she can't do this anymore, but still, she thanks him for the time they spent together. It's sad, especially since it was New Year's Eve. Moving on to our main couple, everything is fine with them, and they go out to drink to celebrate Untak's coming of age. As soon as the alcohol takes effect on our protagonist, she comments that for the night to be romantic, only one thing was missing, their first official kiss, and since the goblin also has feelings for the girl, it ends up happening. The next day, we see that the Grim Reaper is quite depressed about his breakup with Sunny, and to help them make up, the goblin and the protagonist plan to meet, each with one half of the couple, but things didn't go well, and the atmosphere became tense. Later, when the goblin was at home, he remembered that vision of the future where Untak was at a restaurant in Canada waiting for a man, as if it were a date. Kim Shin noticed that around her neck was a necklace that the girl had shown interest in the first time they visited the country, so the goblin didn't think twice and quickly got up to buy it. When he returned home, Kim Shin found President Yu inviting him to play a game of Go, and during the game, the goblin received a vision indicating that the gentleman would soon pass away. Thus, later Kim Shin tells the Grim Reaper that he will receive a visitor at the tea house in a few days, and Woo Bin also reveals something to the goblin. The man decides to tell what he saw when he touched Sunny and that he believes she might be the reincarnation of Kim Shin's sister. Well, I don't know if receiving this information was good for the goblin because as soon as he found out, he and the Grim Reaper went to Sunny. At the location, the goblin ended up telling her that in her past life, she was his sister, even giving details about her becoming a queen, but as expected, Sunny didn't remember anything and didn't quite believe it. Moving on to the protagonist, she began to feel strange seeing so much interest from the goblin in Sunny, and since neither of the two, in this case, the Grim Reaper and Kim Shin, would tell her what it was all about, she went to Diakwa to find out. As soon as the boy told her, Untak was shocked. But later, this would help the goblin because when her boss asked if she believed in past lives and the protagonist explained what she knew, Sunny became more open to hearing what Kim Shin had to say, so the woman asked Untak to take her to the man. And so, the goblin told Sunny what he remembers and what he learned from the letters his sister had written to him. When the general returned from his last battle, the king made the queen choose between dying as the sister of a traitor or dying as his loyal wife, and since Kim's son knew who the real enemy was, she exposed everything she knew about Jung Hyun to her husband, but we know where that led. In the next scene, the protagonist went to her job to see how her boss was doing, and when she arrived, she found Sunny feeling unwell. The woman explained that after hearing everything the goblin had to say, it felt like her body ached much deeper than usual. The next day, the protagonist went to her last day of school, and from now on, she should only worry about her graduation. These moments are a bit delicate for her because shortly after, the teacher allowed the parents to come in to congratulate their children, and since Untak has no one, she feels alone. But that woman dressed in red, who was the lady who took care of her when the protagonist was little, suddenly appears, surprising everyone, including the girl. And after congratulating Untak, the woman scolded her teacher for how she treated the protagonist all these years. Later, the goblin also showed up at the place. As did the Grim Reaper and Sunny, but they bumped into each other before entering the school and ended up having a conversation at a cafe. There, the woman continues to want to know Wu Bin's true identity, but he keeps hiding it, and after the man gives her flowers, they say their goodbyes. In the next scene, we see that Untak's cousins and aunt were released from prison, but they still have the same mindset that they should take the girl's insurance money for themselves. Focusing now on the goblin, we see that upon receiving a card with the protagonist's name, the Grim Reaper rushed to tell his friend, and now Kim Shin believes it's time to tell Untak the truth. Thus, the two sit in the living room, and the man goes over the information about what will happen if she doesn't remove his sword. The protagonist is quite scared and upset that their destiny isn't to be together as she imagined, but realizing how much the girl is sinking, thinking about what decision to make, the goblin promises to find a solution. Moving on to the Grim Reaper, Sunny finally discovers that he is not an ordinary human when she is in her restaurant and senses someone's presence. We could say that the woman gives Wu Bin a hint, causing his hat to fall, allowing her to see him. This time, the Grim Reaper promises he won't do anything to make her forget and will just accept that he was caught. Now, some things start to make sense to Sunny, like the man's identity not being revealed, even because he doesn't have one. Meanwhile, the protagonist was being bothered by one of those ghosts, and with nothing else to do, she decided to help one who wanted to take revenge on her husband. So the girl went to his company, and later, the two went up to the roof to talk. During the discussion, Untak repeated everything the ghost said, and when she realized that the man had taken the woman's life by pushing her from a certain height, the protagonist realized she was also facing her fall, as the Grim Reaper had warned the goblin. Immediately, the protagonist scolds the ghost for being selfish and putting her at risk. Then Untak uses a lighter to call her boyfriend to save her, and as soon as she does that, the ghost's husband is thrown down the stairs. Later, Kim Shin takes him to the police station and forces him to confess the crimes he committed. The next day, we see the Grim Reaper talking to a colleague about another lost soul he has pending. It's about a man who seems to have been wandering this world for a long time, and unlike the others, this one is fascinating for not being afraid of a Grim Reaper, but since this distracted him, Wu Bin ended up letting him escape. And you won't believe who the lost soul is. Moving on to the protagonist, she's at work when this apparition appears, and it's Jung Hyun, the one who harbors a deadly grudge against the goblin. The man extended his hand to greet Untak, but she asked all the ghosts to leave so as not to scare the customers. Later at home, recalling the incident, the protagonist confesses to being scared. But she shifts her focus when she turns her eyes to that saying the goblin had written in his diary, and since Untak hasn't managed to translate it entirely, she quickly leaves the room and goes to the Grim Reaper to ask for help. However, the goblin was with the man in the living room, and as soon as he uses his powers to grab the notebook, he realizes it belonged to him. The protagonist explains that she was curious to know what it was about and that Diakwa had told her it was about the goblin's first love, but it wasn't that at all. Then Untak tries to translate the first sentence, repeating exactly what Diakwa had told her, but again, it wasn't what was written, and what the protagonist just said was something the goblin hadn't told anyone, it was only mentioned in a conversation where he had made a request to the Almighty. Soon, the Grim Reaper realized that Diakwa knew about his powers even before the goblin said anything, and even Untak realized some other things. But now, could the boy be more than just a simple human? In the next scene, we see some conversations between Diakwa and that woman in red, and it seems he might be the Almighty. Our theory is somewhat confirmed when the Grim Reaper and the goblin go to meet the man. There, Diakwa finally shows his powers and reveals that he has been listening to all the duo's laments all this time. Diakwa talks about the goblin complaining all this time, wishing to end his life, and when he gave him a bride, the man decided he wanted to live. He also adds that he didn't erase the Grim Reaper's memory, that was a choice solely his. However, afterward, Diakwa says that they should look for the answers to the questions they asked and also say goodbye to the boy, pointing to himself. Then, a bunch of white butterflies appear around Diakwa, and the man's body collapses. So, We can say that the Almighty's presence in the boy was temporary. For a while, I was thinking he was behind everything. Later, we see that Jung Hyun is already causing havoc again in the lives of our beloved group. The lost soul went to a Grim Reaper and asked if she wasn't curious to know who she was in her past life or what she did. And if the woman wanted to know, she should touch Sunny's hand to understand what the establishment owner meant in her path. The next day, a sad situation unfolds for us. The day President Yu is to pass away has arrived, and the goblin couldn't hold back his tears when the Grim Reaper told him. And for Diakwa, it was no different, as the man blamed himself for not being a better grandson. But from that moment on, it seems a switch flipped for him, and he now decided to take seriously everything his grandfather taught him about the goblin's care. Now moving on to a happier subject, the next day marks the start of the protagonist's college classes, and to celebrate, Kim Shin gave her that necklace he went to Canada to buy. And afterward, the goblin went to an interview being conducted with some candidates at the company he passed on to Diakwa. The reason for his visit is that the loyal soldier who fulfilled his wish to end his life as a general so the enemy wouldn't do it had reincarnated, so Kim Shin wanted to apologize for leading him to that lost battle. And to reward him, without the man knowing, the goblin got him the job, a house, and a new car. At night, we move to the protagonist at work, and once again, she receives an unwanted visit from Jung Hyun. Wanting to cause discord, the lost soul reveals that King Wang Yeo is living with the goblin, and now we discover the Grim Reaper's real name. Jung Hyun did this to make it clear that since the protagonist decides when Kim Shin's end will be, she will now do the same with this secret to decide the Grim Reaper's end, because the lost soul is sure that the moment she tells, the goblin will take the man's life. And remember that Grim Reaper Jung Hyun told to touch Sunny's hand to know who she was in her past. So the woman went to Sunny, and as we know, Sunny is the queen, and the Grim Reaper was like a castle maid who possibly wanted to poison her, but I'm not sure about this last part. Later, Wang Yeo goes to visit his beloved. He wants to end the questions in his head and be sure of who he was in his past life. The man can get this information by kissing Sunny, and when it happens, we become sure he was the king, but the man still doesn't, as only the woman can see this information. However, seeing it on her face and as she starts to cry, Wang Yeo understands it's a painful memory, so he tries to use his powers to make Sunny only keep the good memories and then forget him. Once that's done, the man leaves. The next day, when the goblin goes to Sunny at the establishment, she shows she remembers the time when she was his sister, which makes them both emotional. And later, after he picks up the protagonist from college, she tells him that some strange things started happening to her after Jung Hyun appeared, so he leaves her at home and then goes in search of the lost soul. When he finds him, Jung Hyun takes pleasure in telling Kim Shin who the Grim Reaper is and rubbing it in our beloved goblin's face that once again, his sister fell in love with the one who took her life. As soon as he receives this information, rage blinds Kim Shin, who starts searching for the Grim Reaper everywhere. And when he finds him, the goblin's desire was truly to take the man's life. However, during the conversation, he simply gives up and accepts that the Almighty, even after all the foolish things that young king had done, remains on his side, as it's very easy for the Reaper to remember nothing. Thus, Kim Shin removes his hands from Wang Yeo's neck and walks away. What did you think of these episodes? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, please like and share to help me. Until next time.